Also like to take the opportunity. Oh, sorry.
Put your chair on, Mike.
Thank you. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank very sincerely Andrew Wright, who has been a private sector representative of the LEP Board now for 9 years. And this won't be his last meeting with the West Yorkshire Combined Authorities. I think you're attending the Beak Committee later on this month. But Andrew has just done such a sterling job as chair of what was the BIG group, the Business Innovation Group, and then deputy chair of Beak. He had launched the Growth Service and continues to be a massive ambassador for the Growth Service. And also, I think very timely, was around to sign the initial Memorandum of Understanding with Innovate UK, which of course transpired into our new West Yorkshire Action Plan with Innovate UK just a few weeks ago. So I just wanted to thank on behalf of the board and formally for the minutes, just such an amazing contribution, Andrew, and I look forward very much to sort of sharing more stories about your 9 years, both later on today and later on in the month. Okay, so on to the formal agenda. Item 1 is apologies. So Miles, is it okay just to confirm any apologies, please?
Apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Richard Cooper, Asma Iqbal, Councillor Shabir Pandor, Professor Simon Pringle, Kamran Rashid, Councillor Tim Swift, Cully Thurai, Councillor Andrew Waller, and guests Peter Mucklow and Tom Riordan.
Okay, so we have quite a few apologies there, but I'm grateful for everyone else who has braved the snow in Leeds to make it here and hopefully can make it back. So item number 2, declarations of interest. Can I just ask if any members of this board have any interest they wish to declare for any item on the agenda today? I can't see any hands, so I will take that as no. There's nothing on the agenda that would be exempt, so we're not going to exclude the press and public for any of this meeting. It will be fully open and streamed. And as a result, can I just remind everyone, as Miles so kindly reminded me, to turn the microphone on when we're speaking in the meeting, and that's the button that's nearest to you. So if we go to item 4, the minutes of the meeting held on the 1st of December last year, which seems a while ago now. I've certainly been through them, and I know Ben has been through them on behalf of West Yorkshire, but just checking that everyone is happy to confirm that they are an accurate record of our conversations in December. And no comments on those. Great. I will then sign those towards the end of the meeting, and then we can have that for a record. So if we move to item 5, delighted to be joined by the Mayor, and Tracy, it'd be great if you could perhaps give your update to the meeting.
Lovely. Thank you all so much, and it's a pleasure to be here today. And as the only woman Metro Mayor in England, I think it's important to say Happy International Women's Day to everybody in the room. And I'm hosting a free event tomorrow, open to all, which is also going to feature the legend that is Sally Wainwright, the creator of Happy Valley. I'll be interviewing her. And our local authority partners are also holding their own events in their regions to celebrate the incredible women in their communities. This year's theme for International Women's Day is Digital, Innovation and Tech for Gender Equality. And the International Women's Day dinner that I'm hosting this evening with inspiring female leaders in digital and tech in our region is a nod to that, and it's in partnership with Cognizant, the US headquartered global tech firm, Lloyd's Banking Group, and I'm grateful to them for their support. I'm looking forward to having a good chat with digital leaders in our region. And sadly, recent figures show that UK dropping 5 places on the international league table for women in work, with our childcare costs the highest in the OECD at 33%. It's something I know I have no powers over currently, but as leaders in business, I know it's something that you will be concerned about, getting women into your sector. And I will press however I can to get better, high quality, cheaper childcare for families. So on Monday, I was at the Transport for the North conference, highlighting the impact that the poor service provided by TransPennine is having on our region. You may have seen some of the media coverage. It started at Radio 4 at 10 to 7 in the morning and ended up on Channel 4 later in the evening. And I think we reached London. We reached Suffolk for some weird reason. But I'm hoping that we can turn what people would like to reduce into a local issue into a national issue, because this is definitely holding us back. TPE cancelled 1,700 services in the first 4 weeks of this year, and if there's no improvement, by the end of this year, 23,000 services will have been cancelled. And we can't go on like this. I know you feel the same when it comes to getting workforce in, and it's affecting our economy to the tune of 6 million a week, and across West Yorkshire, across the north rather, 8 million a week. Is the economic impact. I've been speaking with ministers, management and unions to encourage a resolution, but to be frank with you, I have little confidence in the recovery plan that I've seen. It was a summary, so I haven't seen all the detail. We've requested it, but I'm not sure we can stagger on like this for another 8 years. In May, government will decide whether they give First Group and TransPennine another contract of 8 years more misery. So I'm definitely being very public about the fact that that contract should be withdrawn. The bus market remains challenging, and though I'm grateful government listened to my and other mayors' calls to extend revenue funding for another 3 months, yet again a short-term deal, another cliff edge. Frustrating, and especially when First has chosen to make service cuts regardless, choosing to move drivers and buses onto more profitable high-frequency routes rather than prioritising those community connections. More positively, data on the first 3 months of Mayor's fares. You'll know that the Mayor's fares cap bus fares at £2. 7.2 million journeys have benefited since they were introduced in September, and saved the public around £3.6 million in a cost of living crisis. That's quite impactful. And also, analysis shows bus usage has grown from 81% pre-pandemic to 87% in December, and that's a welcome growth. But despite all this, we're continuing to press ahead with our plans for better transport in the region. We're developing the transport investment, including mass transit. It's a really big scheme. Leeds is the only city in Europe without mass transit. And this is going to benefit not just Leeds, but the whole of West Yorkshire. We'll be running interviews across some major roads between March and May, car park surveys, roadside interviews, surveys at bus stops, rail stations. We need the data to help us make those decisions. At the beginning of last month, I attended Arab Health Conference in Dubai, and really delighted to see so many West Yorkshire businesses there representing our region. And I was invited by the Department of International Trade. It's one of the world's largest health and life science conferences, and I was able to champion the 600 business strong health and life science sector we have in the region, and highlight to potential investors that the UK's life sciences sector is more than just London and the South East. We have our own golden triangle up here. I was also privileged to attend a meeting with Sir Keir Starmer and senior business leaders in London, talking about the need to drive growth back into our economy and how mayors can make a difference to that. The roundtable included the CEO of Microsoft UK, Mark Carney, the former Governor of the Bank of England, the General Director of the CBI, the CEO of Octopus Energy, and my favourite woman, Deborah Meaden. And it was a really lively discussion. And I made the case for further, deeper, wider devolution for mayors, giving us more powers to support growth and opportunity. And finally, next week, it'll be the Chancellor's spring statement. I'll be waiting to see what he announced on the day, but we've written to him, urging him to extend energy support to households and businesses beyond April. We all know too many of our families and businesses continue to struggle. We're also hopefully going to hear a little bit more about the investment zones that were discussed with Liz Truss's government. It does sound like they're going to be limited to only 10. We've made a really strong pitch to link up our strong health and life sciences sector. Also, we are hoping to see an announcement on the government's Trailblazer Devo deal being negotiated with Greater Manchester and also with West Mids. We are hoping we will be next, and I made the case to Michael Gove on his visit to the region. And as I understand it, and both Andys are very open about their negotiations with government, and it seems that negotiations are centred on deepening existing powers such as skills and trying to secure a single funding pot direct with the Treasury rather than managing funding relationships with multiple government departments. That would give us greater flexibility and freedom about how combined authorities allocate their resources. And I and other local authority leaders met with the Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove, as I mentioned at the end of last year, to push for us in West Yorkshire to be that next in line for the Trailblazer deal. So you'll see in your pack what that would mean for further wider devolution, and I would encourage you, if you haven't read it already, please do have a look, because it would be massively impactful for businesses in our region and our wider economy. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Matt, and I'm sure I can speak on behalf of all of the board members just to say we very much appreciate yours and all of the other leaders' efforts in lobbying for transport. I think some of the letdowns that we've had on services are having a real impact on businesses and also commuters, and I think any improvements we can get on today's service or mass transit or future investment in the region would be very much welcomed. I think also the Mayor mentions the budget. We will be talking about our economic update and economic development as we go forward on this agenda. I think we've got item 7 to talk explicitly about that. The budget is next week. We remain hopeful that some of the asks that we've been very clear about from West Yorkshire will be listened to as part of that. And I think we'll come on and talk hopefully more about investment zones and the real opportunity that they can bring for this group. So before we move on to the next item, are there any questions any board member would like to make for the Mayor, or any statements? Councillor Hinchcliffe.
Yeah, just on the investment zones, obviously the Mayor mentioned the health and life science one there, but there are other investment zones that we're pushing out there in West Yorkshire as well. So are there 3 are there, or I can't remember how many there were now.
That's right, there are 3. There is the Innovation Arc, there is the Bradford Southern Gateway, and there is Huddersfield University and their National Health Service investment at the university, which is a massive investment and really impressive. So we're saying that there are 3 options, or they could roll them all together. We're happy to have further conversations.
We're pushing all 3 of them, aren't we, to be a part of those 10 nationally then, that's what we're doing.
It's not in our gift though, so they are the submissions that we've made, and we're making the case that they could take 1, they could take 3, we can work really closely with them. And they don't have to be in one particular area. You know, we could have the 2 universities working together, Bradford being part of that. So it's up to, obviously, the government, but it does sound like they're rolling back on the investment in that idea. But Ben, did you want to come in on that?
Mayor, thank you. Only to say, to respond to Councillor Hinchcliffe, that I think the thing that's coming through is there's a focus on particular sectors, and so the theme of which of our zones work to which sectors is becoming quite an important aspect of this.
So it's very disappointing from government if that's the case, because I know from previous work we've done on the industrial strategy that when they focus on sectors, it generally goes to the most affluent places in the country, because that's where you have the golden triangle of London, Cambridge, etc. So that will prejudice the government decision and against us in West Yorkshire, therefore. So we're a place that makes lots of bits of things. We don't have massive sectors going through things. So I do think, some government thinking, they need to see about the inequalities that they're baking into their programmes if that's how they're focusing their investment in the future. And it seems like they've learnt nothing from the last few years.
Ben, would you like to come back in on that just before we move on to the next step?
Thank you, Chair. Only to say that the new element to the latest kind of call around investment zones is that commitment to levelling up, and you can rest assured that we're absolutely reminding government of the importance of that in their thinking, and the levelling up that needs to happen across West Yorkshire.
Okay, if no further questions, I'll move us to item number 6 on the agenda, which is LEP governance. And I'll pass to Alan Rees for this item, but I guess I just wanted to sort of overall outline the various things that are in this paper for our consideration today. So firstly, it very much builds on the LEP integration plan, which we submitted to government last July, and we have talked about this LEP board in September and December, and there are some governance changes that are required to do that. The proposal is those governance changes would take place relatively straight away on Monday, the 13th of March, which is next Monday. Secondly, the paper goes on to talk about the urgent need to get on with recruiting further private sector board members. I want to stress, I think this is a really urgent thing that we do need to get on with. We already, since we submitted the integration plan, have had 4 board members need to leave the board, mainly due to their tenure expiring, and we have a further 2 in Andrew and Simon Pringle who will be rolling off the board soon. That would be 50% of the private sector members on the board when we roll back to a year ago. But if we look at the time in terms of number of years served on the board, that's actually about 2/3 of the time that we would be losing by the people who have reached the end of the tenure. So I think it's really important that we urgently prioritise the recruitment of private sector members. The paper also then goes on to talk about various portfolios that our private sector members could take place, both in terms of deputy chair and potentially others, to more equitably share some of the responsibilities across this board going forward. So we're asking for opinions on that. And also there is a proposed and draft role profile for the chair of the board, including some specifics on recruitment for the chair of the board that Alan will go on and talk about. So we're being asked to consider those recommendations and formally then talk about the recommendations that are listed in the paper in IS section number 10 from 10.1 to 10.3. So Alan, was that an intro? Could you possibly go into some more of the details and walk us through those recommendations?
Will do. Thank you very much, Mark. So as the Chair said, this all goes back originally to the LEP review and then the Levelling Up white paper, which set out the proposal to integrate LEPs into MCAs where they exist, and then the government set out further guidance. So the implementation plan, which we were then required to develop, was discussed and agreed last July, as Mark said, and submitted. There were then various changes within government which delayed sign-off of that plan, and it didn't finally come through until January. The paper essentially, as Mark has said, sets out the necessary steps to put into practice that integration. But I just think it's worth giving a little bit of background as to what we're trying to achieve here. So, as discussed previously with the board, we're seeking to build on the strong private and public sector partnership which has existed in West Yorkshire for many years, and maintain and strengthen the private sector voice in CA decisions. That includes membership, private sector membership, continuing across all of the decision-making committees within the combined authority. So, with all of this, we're trying to implement the government recommendations, and the implementation plan has been agreed, but essentially maintain all of the good elements we have, maintain the best practice that we have, and we are closer to the model that government really wants to see than anywhere else, really, and we have far less to do in making these changes than some other places do, who are having to make. There are some other places that are having to make much more substantial changes. So the LEP in the future will become essentially the primary business advisory board to the Mayor and the Combined Authority, and we're proposing in here, as previously agreed, that it has a key role in shaping the Combined Authority's business support offer, promoting and delivering it, promoting and facilitating inward investment, trade missions and exports, ensuring that our skills and employment support is focused on local labour market needs, shaping our overall approach to economic growth, our economic growth strategy, and translating that into meaningful action, and then also ensuring that equity, diversity and inclusion are at the heart of everything that we do. So with those aims having been previously agreed, this paper then seeks approval of the articles, terms of reference and the recruitment procedure, which have already been seen by the combined authority when it last met. It also, as Mark said, includes the draft role profile for the chair, and the chair of the LEP in the future becomes a mayoral appointment, and the LEP will continue to be represented on the CA. As Mark said, the paper is also proposing to commence recruitment. On the role of the LEP chair and the profile, there's a second part to this, which is around remuneration. So there is an independent remuneration panel which it was previously agreed would be convened to provide advice to the combined authority about the appropriate level of remuneration, and that panel has met, and its conclusions will be brought forward to the combined authority next week. Following that, and any further feedback that is given today on the role profile, at that point there will then be decisions taken around beginning recruitment. As Mark said as well, we're seeking feedback on the portfolios for other members of the LEP board, and in particular the key roles that people have as deputy chairs of each of the committees. So the next steps are the governance changes come into force next week. We propose to go out to recruit for members, and then we're seeking feedback on the role profile and the conclusions of the IRP to come to the CA next week. So that's it in summary. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Alan. So to be clear, we're being asked to consider first in recommendation 10.1 the governance, which is outlined in Appendix 1, the draft terms of reference, Appendix 2, which is the revised recruitment and appointment procedure for private sector representatives, and also Appendix 3. And my suggestion is we start with sort of comments on the governance, and then we'll move to the recommendation on the draft board member role profile and the draft LEP chair role profile, and then we'll talk about sort of portfolios or more general. So I guess, are there any questions, comments, or any other feedback on the specific parts of the governance in the paper that Alan has mentioned and also referenced in Appendix 1, 2 or 3? No. Okay, I can't see that, so I'm going to assume as a board we are content with those things. Then if we move then to recommendation 10.2, and this talks specifically about, we provide comments on the draft board member role profile and the draft LEP chair role profile that's provided in Appendix 4 and Appendix 5. Are there any comments or feedback that we would like to offer on those? Andrew.
Yeah, I'm happy to see that that the strengthening and deepening stuff is all there, and that's good. I am a little bit concerned that the LEP chair role has taken you and your predecessor a lot more days than actually, normally in the contract, as it were. And because you both have done it in that way, I think that's a lot of the reason that we've had the success that we have. So I worry a little bit that a future person may see perhaps what might be seen as a reduction in the number of days available to do the work as a negative, and something that they might want to unpack. And it doesn't sit very comfortably with me with the strengthening and moving on to a stronger thing. So I just worry about that a little bit. I note that the idea is that there is more input from chairs around the LEP table. I think that's good. My remark on that would be, as you're doing that replacement of the 5 or 6 people to be brought onto the LEP, that you make their availability a big part of the criteria, which I think we haven't always done before. I think we've normally been glad to get a really strong person, which is good. But if it's a really strong person who can't actually give the time, then this model is really, really not going to work. And therefore, I think you need to change a little bit of emphasis on that. And then the second thing is, there's nothing about payment here, but I can imagine that if we are thinking of reducing the amount of time, there may be a suggestion that the LEP chair role would attract less remuneration. And my concern about that is that it may impact on the number of people who feel able to apply. And I do worry about the diversity of the type of person who might be able to come and give that kind of commitment for that kind of money. And that, somebody who isn't independently wealthy, somebody who may not be retired, for example, these kind of people might really have to think carefully about it. And I dare say that's not the intention of everybody as we set it up. So I just ask for that to be thought of, and offer as a suggestion that if we are going for a lower number of days, perhaps there could be a per diem that the role would attract. And therefore, if officers, the mayor and others are asking the individual to do a lot more, then the salary is increased appropriately, but only as the people who are asking for that input require it. And if the individual is not providing it, then they don't get paid. But if they're really doing a good job and people want them to do more, then they are paid a bit more. And that might be a way through the problem we have. Okay.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I really appreciate those very thoughtful comments. I think, in particular, your point on availability of private sector members is one that I know we haven't always considered. But in the role profile, just drawing out the paper says we might be expecting 1 to 2 days per month for someone to contribute on a voluntary basis, which is obviously for someone in full-time senior positions a big ask on sort of 22 working days in a month. So Mandy, I think I saw your hand as well. Would you like to come in for some comments?
Thank you. I'd like to echo what Andrew said. I think the scale of between 1 to 2 days is quite significant. That's 100% more time from 1 to 2 on a scale of somebody who's going to pay you between 50,000 and 100,000. Not that that's the LEP chair's amount. It's a big difference. You wouldn't have a scale like that. And if we look at the top end of that, is that actually what Mark has been doing and what the previous chair were doing? If we're reducing it from what they're doing to 10, it's one thing, but if we're reducing it from what they're doing to 5, it's a completely different role. So is the role a doing role, or is it a chairing role? And I think that's something that we need to make sure that we understand fully. I really support all the changes, obviously, in governance and the portfolios. But again, with those LEP board members, what is the role? Is the role to lead and to do, or is it to oversight and advise? And there is a difference in the amount of time that takes for people who are volunteering for the role. And I completely echo Andrew's point about inclusivity. Increasing time and increasing work or reducing pay all affects inclusivity, and it's really important that we do what we say and what we present reflects how we want to be as a region. So I think we just need to consider that, and I'm sure we have considered it, but whether what we're putting here reflects what we really want to be like. We've got big ambitions. We need to have the best people, and that includes time and money and availability, and all of those things should be available to everyone in the region who would like to be part of this.
Thank you, Mandy. Again, very thoughtful comments and very complimentary, I think, to those of Andrew. Just as we're in the providing feedback and comment stage, just offering it out to any other member of the board to comment. Becky.
Thank you. So I would echo all of that, so I won't repeat it. Obviously, yeah, from a business representative organisation, we can really help from a recruitment perspective. I think what needs, and echoing what Mandy said, the ask needs to be really compelling, the why bother element, and I think we need to be really thinking about the language we're using. There's lots and lots of work going on about how you sort out your offers of employment. I know this isn't employment, but if somebody's giving up their time, that's got to be really compelling. There was a question on 2.14. It said no timescales are currently agreed. Is there any reason for that? Do we know? Just you don't need to answer me now. But that was just a query, and I think obviously, and I would say this. There's nothing about business representative organisations in the whole article, which just seems a bit strange. So obviously, questions about I assume you'd still want us involved in some form, but it'd be nice to see that obviously in there, and then. The other thing was the sort of termination piece. It said people could be terminated immediately, but it doesn't actually say what grounds you could be terminated on. On the attendance thing, I think this is really interesting because obviously we run a regional council. I know the Chambers run something really similar. We're really clear about the sort of, if you don't attend, you do not serve the rest of your term, because there's no point having. We don't allow substitutes, and otherwise. People have got to sort of buy into it, and yes, I have the unenviable task of chucking people off times, but I'd rather people be around the table. So I hope that's helpful.
It's very helpful, Becky, and we don't need to divert to officers to say that the business rep organisations, of course, are vital to this, and thank you for the role that you're doing in pulling together the other business rep organisations and representing them as a co-opted member of the LEP board. I think that's been very, very helpful for conversations like this, and also when we talk about the economic update. And rest assured, I know the commitment to work closer with the business rep organisations is there, and I think that's some useful feedback to sort of take into the papers. I'm building a list of sort of comments, and also I think there's that specific question on timescales for the LEP chair, which I will defer to probably Ben or Alan for in a bit. But Mandy, I think you wanted to come back in on that.
Yeah, apologies if I've missed this when I've been reading the papers. I think we need to consider who the LEP chair reports to. So I think it's important that that's underlined, because I think it should be not a political role with a capital P, and I don't mean that disrespectfully, Tracy, at all, but it needs to be independent. And so although it needs to be appointed to work with Tracy closely, and I know that we all enjoy doing that, if anything changes on the political landscape, we need to make sure that the LEP chair remains constant, because that gives us that continuity. So it's understanding that, and I don't know if I picked that from the papers. It may just be that I read them with a glass of wine and missed it. So apologies if that's the case.
Thanks, Mandy. We'll reflect the comment. Just, I think, to reiterate something that Alan said, I understand the LEP chair role will be a mayoral appointment, so it will be appointed by the mayor. That is as it's read, and we are being asked to, as you have provided comments and feedback on what's written in the paper.
Yeah, and it does need to think about what happens if anything changes. What is the continuity of the role? So I think that's important for whoever takes that role, that they understand that.
Thank you, Mandy. Continuing, Nikki.
Thank you, Mark. I think really just to echo the comments that Andrew and Mandy have said, I think the time is really important, particularly around the purpose of the chair to best serve the mayoralty. So if it is a convening role, it would make sense that it's that amount of time, but if it's actually a delivery role, which I'm picking up in here, I think that probably more time may be needed. But I think the idea of having an add-on day or add-on days, as Andrew suggested, could be helpful. I didn't know what the spirit of the reduction was. You have to forgive me, I'm coming to this new, so I'm learning on the job. But I would have a concern if it's a delivery role, that might not be enough, and it won't actually serve the purpose of the mayor necessarily well either. So it was just really just to echo the comments that colleagues have made as well.
Okay, thank you, Nikki. Absolutely, very helpful. And to just put that in context, my predecessor, Sir Roger Marks, was something up to 12 days per month, and that's the sort of continuation that I have been serving in the interim basis that I've been taking that on. So just to answer that as a sort of factual point of reference. Before I then pass to Ben, I think, or Alan to come in, just offering up any further comments or feedback. Amir.
Thank you. It was just a wider point really about the role of private sector members. I think to really be able to bring their experience to the agenda items, and I think that some of the work that's been sort of recently talked about, sort of empowering the private sector to bring that forward and not simply respond to what is presented in front of them, I think is a really important thing. And I personally sort of find that there's lots of areas that I feel, oh gosh, this could be done so differently, but there isn't actually the vehicle or there isn't a framework within which to feed into that and change that. So I think that some of the things that you set out with the deputy chairs, I think is really important to be able to bring the private sector in the committees. But I think that does need to go further and does need to be embedded further, so that there is a two-way sort of combined approach to how things are shared. So I just think that we're not maximising the value that I think we fully have within our private sector members.
Okay, thank you, Amir. And Becky, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, just very quickly, and it's back down to the number of days on this region has always had the reputation of having a really strong LEP. And I do think that is in part to the time dedicated to the role of the chair and the board, and you want that to remain, and I hear that reflected around the country. So you want, and that makes me proud, because I sit there, yes, that's my patch. But you want that to continue, really, in that sense.
Thank you, Becky. Councillor Hinchcliffe, can I pass you?
Yeah, just reflecting on Amanda's comment about politics. Actually, I've not really thought about it before, but just thinking about things. When Sir Roger was in post, he wasn't a political person, but he sat with us and discussed devolution, etc. But was able in himself have the skills to remain impartial politically. And we obviously had political meetings, but he wasn't part of that. Yet he could talk practically about the best for the region. And I think so the person who is appointed needs to be able to do that. And I don't think it's a big change actually working to the mayor than it was to the leaders, because the leaders are still going to be involved in the appointment, aren't they? So I don't think it's a big shift actually. But I think you're right in that the person who is appointed needs to be apolitical. And needs to be able to, because obviously leaders, we're 5 political leaders, but we can be of any political colour. So the person who takes this role has a very important role in working collaboratively with leaders, staying out of politics, and being able to collaborate mainly with the business community, because that is the real advantage they bring, actually being able to connect with the business community that we necessarily can't. I said, we're in a different sphere, if you like. So I suppose it's the qualities of the person that we need to be conscious of that. But we've never had an issue with Roger or yourself, indeed, Mark. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure there's anything you could put in place that has changed things. I don't think anything's changed.
Okay, thank you guys. I think that's useful historical context as well. If I sort of sum up the points that I'm sort of hearing and trying to group them together, not intending to miss them, but then I'll pass to sort of Ben, I think, for some sort of comments on that. So firstly, quite a few comments about the role profile for the LEP chair and the amount of time and whether sort of doing or convening, I think, to use Nikki's words. I think there's a point around the availability of private sector members for the recruitment and actually having the sort of confidence to talk about, well, this does require time above and beyond sitting in a meeting, and we are expecting this. And actually, I quite like, Becky, your sort of comments on attendance, for those who perhaps aren't regular attendants, right? Well, that's fine. There are obviously other priorities. I think we need to sort of reflect that. I think there's a specific point that we don't have the benefit of discussing today on remuneration, but whether that would impact the diversity of the potential applicants for the LEP chair role. I want to pick up on the point on recruitment that I think Becky raised, but I think is implied in others, on the why bother, and actually actively taking not just the offer of the business rep groups to promote widely the availability of the private sector member roles, but also the LEP chair role, but also all of us, both as political leaders and business leaders, to make sure that all of the private sector members promote that widely. And then there was a specific question on the timescales for LEP chair recruitment. So I think we all understand from the paper that the private sector board member recruitment will happen straight away. I think there was a specific question that came from Mandy on the timescales. So Ben, if I could perhaps pass to you for sort of any comments and sort of lead the conversation further.
Okay, thank you. So where to begin? So I'll go through Mark's points, but I guess there's a point that kind of precedes this, which is that LEPs were created back in 2010-11 before there was a kind of regional elected mayoral model in place. And I think the government guidance through the strengthening LEPs process they've been through is designed to reflect the fact that we now do have that democratic position in place. And so the government has been quite explicit in saying that is where the accountability for economic regeneration funds now sits. So it has moved away from LEPs and it sits with mayoral combined authorities where there are mayoral combined authorities, and where there aren't mayoral combined authorities, the government is trying to encourage places to create them. So that's the kind of landscape in which these decisions are being made. And as Alan said in his introduction, many of the things that government is trying to achieve across England in terms of the working together, the partnership and integration between LEPs and local government, we're already doing. And so the changes that we talk about today in the scheme of things compared to many other places are very slight. That said, they are still significant. The big issue, I think this plays to both Mandy and Nikki's point, is that it is not a delivery role. What we've tried to do in the draft terms of reference for the LEP chair is reflect the things that government is saying LEP chairs to do, what they want to do, combined with the things that we've found very successful in the past. But the moving away from the growth deal model, where those funds were the responsibility of the LEP, that change has happened. So this is much more about leadership. It's about advice to the mayor, independent advice. I'll come back to that in a second, and kind of promoting the interests of the region, being the business voice for the region. It's much more in that space, and that is what is driving the reduction in days. Mark is right that we have had, as we are required to do, had our independent remuneration panel look at the rates, and that those figures will be published very shortly. I think what we'll find is that the rate, the day rate, if you like, isn't changing, but the reflection is in the reduction in days. So that's the first bit of the backdrop. The second bit is that our objective throughout all of this, and again, as Alan said, is to strengthen the partnership between public and private, and to build on the good work that's already happened, and to maintain that point about independence. And I completely agree with Councillor Hinchcliffe's points. We haven't had a problem with business independence in the past, and it will be something that the recruitment process will need to flush out to make sure that that retains going forwards. It allows me to address the last question that Mark asked around why aren't the timescales more definitive. It's precisely because we knew that going into this process there will be this kind of conversation. So we've allowed a bit of wriggle room in the paper to allow us to bottom out those terms of reference, to have another pass around in case comments came around, so that there's that chance of getting full buy-in for the role of the LEP chair going forwards. So that hopefully that addresses Mark's first point about time and the role. I think the second point about availability that Becky's made is absolutely spot on, and I experience is that you've got to strike a balance, haven't you, between wanting the views of people and their availability, and that's one of the challenges that we'll have in the recruitment process. Linked to that is the role of making more and better use of all of the talents we have around the table, which we're really hoping to do in this slightly revised model. I've tried to cover the point about remuneration, so that will still leave us as one of the highest remunerating local enterprise partnerships, which reflects, again, as Becky says, the fact that we have had a successful LEP and we want that to continue. Only about 1 in 6 of LEPs is remunerating their chair at all. Okay, so we're already in a different space to most, but there's good reasons for that. And added to that, the kind of why bother question that Mark raised. We've worked very hard to make sure that private sector members are not involved in any talking shops. You're sat around the table with the elected members who are accountable for the money and making decisions, and you're voting members on those committees on many topics. So the kind of the sharp edge of the private sector involvement is still there. We need to make sure that we're also creating the space in which you can have the conversations about what is the private sector's view in the way that Amir and Becky and others have talked about in the introduction. So I think that addresses all the points, Mark, hopefully. But I think we will definitely listen to this and we'll definitely revise the terms of reference of the lecture and put that back around members so that we can take another look at this. And that's why the timescales are a bit vague in the paper.
And if I could just add, I think this is a really exciting time for our region, because this new role will help me in our mission around growth in West Yorkshire, and that transformational approach, inward investment of course, but somebody that can be an advisor to me about the best next steps for our region and can be the voice of the private sector. And think about mass transit, that's a public and private massive undertaking, and that's just one of our commitments, and we're going to need somebody that can be that bridge between businesses, but identify people that I need to talk to, what value that they can bring, whilst also empowering. And I've seen the talent around this board, you know, empowering LEP members to be the voice for our region, to be more involved, to help us deliver collectively. And this person will not just be an advisor to me, but also to colleagues on the board and new colleagues in particular. So I've always said it has to be somebody that is really experienced, that has the ear of government, but is also paid properly. And I couldn't agree with you more about the remuneration, because if you don't pay people, then you get you only get people who can afford to do it, and that limits your choices then. So I've always said that that's really, really important. And I just want to say that Mark particularly has worked flat out in this role and has proved you could do this job 7 days a week, actually, with the vision that you have shown, and you know, the ambition that you have for our region. But we know that people are often as well running businesses alongside. So it is a balancing act, but really, really helpful to hear what you have to say. But I think it's such an exciting time. I want to get this right. I want us to get the right person to advise me. And to the political point, I've never been in a less political job in this role, because it does feel like it is not party political, it's about delivery, and it's about outcomes, and it's about making a better West Yorkshire. So I'm sure we might have the occasional difference of opinion. Sir Roger and I maybe had differences of opinion, but actually the common goal was exactly the same. It did not matter. So I'm excited for the next phase for the LEP.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Ben, for that, and thank you everyone for the I think really constructive feedback that I think certainly fulfills the ask of the paper in the recommendation. So, you know, I think my summary is we are very supportive of the governance changes in recommendation 10.1. We have provided comments about the role profiles, detailed comments for board members and also the chair. And you know, I think that those comments, you know, throughout the conversation and summarised at the end, really do start to talk about the future role of the LEP and the portfolios as well. So my suggestion is we sort of draw that there. I'll just offer anyone else the chance to sort of come back in. Mandy, that's why I said that, because I saw your hand up earlier.
Sorry, I'll now go on a bit, but I think a couple of things, and I'll be really quick. Amir made a really good point about being able to bring things to the table as well as oversee them. One of the things I think that works really well is some of the mayoral pledges, like the task force, where we actually start to engage lots of businesses in something and start to change the landscape, and that has worked really well. So having that ability, as Amir said, to do stuff that's a bit different makes us strong. I think that the speed of decision making is really important, that we find a way to speed that up a little bit. I mean, Mark will have been in post for a year by the time we get there, and he's doing a fantastic job, as you said, but we want to make sure that we can do stuff, and I'm sure you do too, Tracy, and that decision making would really help if we can speed that up. And my last suggestion would be, if we're going to reduce the number of days in line with what everybody else is doing, I still think we have the right to be different, and being different is what's made us great. If we're going to do that, we look at Mark's diary and see what it is we're going to be cutting out, because if we reduce the number of days for Mark or the subsequent person, let's hope it's Mark that carries on, then we're going to lose things, and we need to work out what it is we're prepared to lose in that time.
Thank you, Mandy. I think we will capture those comments along the others. I think they're helpful to sort of draw others out. So thank you for a very full conversation. The next steps for this, the governance, as we've said, we will implement from Monday. There is a meeting specifically to talk about various role profiles at the Combined Authority next week, where that will be the decision-making body, which the Mayor, of course, is the chair. So great, I will move us on. Thank you for that to item number 7. Which is the economic update. And again, just to give perhaps a brief introduction to this paper, we spent quite a big chunk of time in both previous LEP boards talking about the economy, because it's, you know, so important right now with the cost of living and doing business crises that we've had, the energy crises, and a lot of firms looking to struggle. So this paper will outline the latest intelligence, and I think it is fair to say that, you know, there are a few, I hate to use the words, but a few green shoots that are starting to emerge, and there's a slightly more confidence and optimism starting to be across the business community. And I think to that point, Tom is going to share some outlines for what a business health dashboard might look like. Far from finished, but work in progress, to say how can we get, you know, the right data more quickly, more timely, to then start to be able to make some decisions to improve the overall business performance and economic health in our region. I think the only other thing I would mention is, I think similar to one of the previous LEP board meetings, we are early from the budget by about a week. So the budget is the key economic event, which is happening, you know, on the 15th of March. I think this paper also very helpfully summarises the asks that we have made as a LEP board across the two board meetings, and also as leaders across the combined authority, detailed in 2.15 of the paper. But then also, I think, I'm sure everyone's read Appendix 3, which is a letter written by the Mayor to our Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, with a lot more detail actually about the asks that we are asking as this region. I think that really follows on from those two last conversations where we said there are things that we can do ourselves, but there's also things that we need to be petitioning national government for further support on. So with that by way of an introduction, Tom, if I can pass to yourself to lead us through this item. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And for people that have heard my updates before, you are about to receive slightly more positivity than you've had over the previous year. Whether you use the word green shoot or the clouds are clearing, albeit not in Leeds today, or something else, whatever you go for, there is some positive news at least going forward. Now, in terms of where we are with inflation, which has been the biggest kind of economic issue, economic change, if you like, over the last sort of 6 to 12 months. Now, CPI is still running at over 10%. The Bank of England target is 2%. But just to draw attention to a couple of key kind of areas of inflation that are still driving it up. Now, there's obviously been a lot of focus on energy prices, which have done a lot of the heavy lifting. But actually, if you look at inflation currently, it's items like food and other essential goods that are driving inflation up. So in the 12 months to January 2023, food inflation was just shy of 17%. And for the 30 cheapest goods, so if you're on low incomes, you might be looking at, say, own brand items, for example, food inflation there is actually around 30%. So the inflation is really, well, it's still embedded in the economy, and it's still a huge issue, particularly for poorer earners. And we know that food insecurity is a massive issue in West Yorkshire relative to other areas as well. So that is a big issue. Transport inflation has been coming down, and for the 7th consecutive month it has fallen. So inflation in the 12 months was 3.4%. However, just one thing to flag around the upcoming budget, the 5p cut in fuel duty, that ends at the budget. Now it might get updated, it might get extended, we don't know, but there is this kind of cliff edge, if you like, on transport inflation. As well as that, there is the annual question, if you like, of do we raise fuel duty in line with inflation? And it's been frozen for most of the previous 13 years. So I suspect the government are looking at that pretty closely. But that's just one thing to flag. In order to try to bring inflation back down to the 2% target, the Bank of England recently raised interest rates. They raised it to 4%. Now there is some conversations going on around do we go further? Do we sort of take our foot off the brakes, if you like, and see where we land? I suspect what will happen is we'll follow other central banks around the world. If they continue raising rates, we'll probably do the same. But in terms of energy prices, as I said earlier on, this was the big thing driving inflation, but it's also where these green shoots are kind of appearing. If you compare gas futures prices as of today to their peak in August 2022, they're actually down 80% from their peak. Now that's obviously good news, an 80% drop, but it is worth remembering without bringing too much negativity back, that gas prices are still considerably higher than they were in 2021. And it will actually take time for these prices to feed into consumers, whether it be businesses or households. Particularly on the household front and the way the Ofgem price cap is calculated, that tends to operate on a 3 to 6 month lag. So it will probably be the summer that we'll start to see the price cap really start falling for households. But that's just some sort of good news that there is actually seemingly a path out of the high inflation that we currently have. Now, in terms of the UK economy and where we go next, the expectation is that we have a pretty sluggish 2023. Productivity is still a major problem for the UK, and in particular, it's a big issue for the West Yorkshire economy as well. So if you look at the difference between sort of 2010 and just before the pandemic, the productivity gap between West Yorkshire and the rest of the country actually increased over that time frame, and that's a real issue, and it explains why living standards are under so much pressure. In terms of where the West Yorkshire economy goes throughout 2023, we commissioned some forecasts earlier in the year which showed that the region is set to contract by around 1.8%. Now this was based on sort of previous data, and as I say, gas prices have fallen quite drastically since then. So it's just one thing to flag that the forecasts are incredibly volatile at the minute. But just another thing to flag is that in the event that the economy, whether it be the UK, West Yorkshire, or just certain particular areas, go into a recession, there is a risk of economic scarring. Now we're starting to see that with the labour market already. We know that economic inactivity went up during the pandemic, whether it be due to early retirements, ill health, caring responsibilities. As the Mayor said earlier on, childcare responsibilities is a big one. We know that there is a risk of economic inactivity being baked in, and that we know that's also a key area that the government are looking at, because it's part of what is causing some of the problems we're seeing in the economy, some of the sluggishness. Anyway, in terms of the West Yorkshire economy, what we're starting to see, and I'll bring this back to the dashboard that Mark mentioned earlier on. So one of the data points that we're tracking is around business liquidations. Now, we've broken that down by district and sector, as well as looking at it on a time series, so we can see roughly whether they're going up or down. Just to flag some of the sectors where they're overrepresented in the liquidations data: manufacturing, construction, art and entertainment. Now, on the manufacturing and construction side, that's primarily due to input costs, supply chains being squeezed. On the arts and entertainment side, that's primarily due to sort of household budgets being squeezed and non-essential spending being cut where possible. An analysis that we did a few months back now showed that because of where energy prices went, the bottom 20 and potentially up to the bottom 30% of earners in West Yorkshire will have had no to very little disposable income left at the end of the month. So it's no surprise then that sectors that are quite cyclical, like arts and entertainment, are particularly struggling. One other factor that we're tracking in the dashboard, or in the proposed dashboard, is around vacancies. And this is becoming a huge issue, not just in West Yorkshire, but across the entire British economy, where we've seen vacancy rates over double pre-pandemic levels, and we're actually seeing a lot of these gaps persist over a long period of time. And this links back to the risk of economic scarring that I mentioned previously, of if we don't get people into the jobs now, into the right jobs now, those businesses will grow at a slower rate, so we'll employ fewer people, and likewise those potential employees will go on to have worse kind of economic outcomes throughout their entire life if they have a slow start to their career, basically. So that's another issue that we're focusing on. In terms of the dashboard in itself, part of the reason why we're seeking to create this, I guess, is to have more of a live understanding and up-to-date data on what's going on across businesses. Some of the data that gets published by the ONS comes with a 12-month flag or a 9-month flag, which is ordinarily, you can deal with it, but in the current climate becomes more of a problem. So we've kind of conceptualised the idea of a dashboard which we'll publish on our website, and it will contain data such as, it will be broken down into 3 sections: labour market data, so out of work claimant counts, vacancy rates, things like that, start-up closure rates, so we can look at whether liquidations are increasing, are businesses kind of replacing those businesses that are going out of business, and then finally, business sentiment. Now, it's the business sentiment point that is probably the hardest to kind of figure out how we're going to do it. One of the proposed approaches is to work with the Chamber of Commerce in their quarterly economic survey and use that as our kind of baseline for sentiment. But I welcome any kind of thought on that, because I recognise that it is a very challenging kind of topic to cover on a relatively live basis. Now, just to kind of finalise then, so we have the budget next week. We'll have with that OBR forecast, which will cover the national economy. They're set to be a bit more optimistic than they were a few months ago, particularly because of the energy price drops on the market, and that fall in wholesale gas price is actually set to save the government anywhere between sort of 4 and 10 billion, depending on how optimistic you are for the British economy going forward. So that's kind of the overall picture. Now, in terms of sort of what we've asked for, the Mayor mentioned some of these issues earlier on, and you can see the sort of strategic outlines in the document as well as in the appendix for a more detailed version of that. But things like innovation, R&D and business support is particularly important to deal with the productivity problem that we've had for a long time. Equally on adult education and skills, we know that that's another issue linking to productivity. Now, I'm harping on about productivity because ultimately, if we can crack that and solve that issue, whether we're looking at it from a kind of resilience going forward whenever the next crisis hits, or just in terms of boosting living standards as a whole, if we can crack that, we can also crack other issues as well. So just to kind of open the discussion, if anyone's got any questions or has comments on the proposed metrics within the dashboard, or can help me out in any way in terms of data availability, I am all ears. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Tom, and it's wonderful to see you just slightly more optimistic than for the last two board meetings. I think the news on energy in particular is a positive one for us to grab hold of. I might just share a couple of initial comments, and then I'd really like to sort of pass to Becky to sort of open this conversation. I think the first thing with data and health aspirations, we can always ask for more data. And there will always be more data. So, for example, when we talk about liquidations, that it's natural to say, well, what type of businesses are liquidating? And actually, were they dormant businesses? And actually, this is not a bad thing to do some sort of clearing up. Or actually, are they significant business in key priority sectors? So we can do that. But I think we also have a job to not let the hunt for perfection get in the way of progress. So I think I'd encourage, as I'm sure all of the board here will think, like, the quicker we can get some metrics up and then work out what we're going to do with those metrics and how we reflect whether some of those metrics are doing well or not doing well and what action that leads to. That's the most interesting, I think, questions that I'd like the conversation to focus on. I think your point also about, leading and lagging indicators and business sentiment is a really interesting one, which is why I'd like to sort of bring Becky in first as the sort of co-opted member to represent all of the business rep groups to potentially offer just her opinions on business sentiment, and I'll pass to you, Becky, before opening up to the rest of the board for comments.
Thank you, Chair. So I put this together. I took this yesterday, which was a bit of a sentiment. So every sort of either one-to-one or event we do, I ask people for one word, and we did a finance leaders event yesterday. So the timing was great. The variety of businesses around the room was the whole gamut really for West Yorkshire. So it was very useful. Has there been a change since Q4? Yes, I think there has, and it's not. It's not right across the board. So I think that yes, in construction, in manufacturing, there is still real challenge there. I think one of the things that came quite strongly through is pipelines are good, but decision-making times for professional services is lengthening. So you've got these sort of encouraging at the top end, but it's not actually dropping out the bottom end. I think there is still real worry from a retail perspective about that. You're seeing lots, high numbers of low-cost items in the basket. At one point that got up to about 90%. It has sort of drawn back a bit, but there's still real sort of concern there. And then obviously a lot of companies now are having to start paying back their coronavirus loans, and that is leading to some of them not going out of business because they can't afford to do that. We're seeing that in very, very small businesses. What I think the other thing that is ticking up is on the sort of lenders risk register. You're seeing more businesses going onto that risk register. So they might not have actually got into sort of very, very great difficulty just yet, but that risk register element is ticking up. I think there's a few things that we've asked for in the budget. The childcare keys really, it has come up really strongly in the business community as an absolute barrier to not being able to get people into work. A lot of people have cancelled breakfast clubs, after school clubs, and therefore are then staying at home and working from home. Well, you don't have the choice to do that. You're still paying, as the Mayor said, an enormous amount out in childcare. I think other concerns around, we've asked them if they're not going to make wholesale change on the apprenticeship levy, can you please think about doing a pilot? Here there's a really good example of apprenticeship levy sharing. That doesn't happen in every region. I'm really keen to sort of focus on that because I've got sort of other businesses that want to do that, I think. And then also about energy efficiency, really, and helping businesses really think about energy efficiency. They might not want to think about it from a decarbonisation perspective, but they might really think about it from an energy efficiency perspective. So I do think there's been a more positive move, and you can see this, by this. I'll try and dig out the Q4 one for the comparison, but it's cautious. There's quite a few people sort of said, can I have 2 words? And that was the cautiously optimistic rather than just the optimistic. I think a lot of people, there's a lot of big decisions got to come in the budget, and there's I think there's a bit of a nervousness that those decisions still won't be made, and that's around business models for energy and all sorts of things. So there is a bit of nervousness, I think, around that. Thank you.
I think that's really helpful, those points, and getting the sort of the live updates across the business groups. I guess I'd like to, we've got 5 to 10 minutes if we need to against this item. I'd like to open it up to other members to sort of comment or potentially ask further questions, in particular around the recommendations on what's going on in the economy, but the business health dashboard as well. So Amit.
Brilliant, thanks very much. Yeah, I really welcome it, and I thought it was really, really good. I think just in probably should declare an interest here. I've got my own data dashboard, but there was 2 things that I thought were really interesting from the work we've been doing. One is I don't know to what extent you use Experian data, but they've created a Delphi scoring matrix, which essentially sort of tracks how many directors, how many staff, how's that company been growing, what sector it's in, and then they score it. And I think where it becomes really interesting is when you start to see, based on these scores, we've then developed that into a score of 5, 1 to 5, so 1 being really at the risk of collapse totally, and 5 being really strong and having really good growth potential, is when you then start mapping them across the whole district and you actually pinpoint where exactly these things are, where these businesses are. And I think that until we geospatially map everything, we actually can't really leverage the information, because even if you take the whole of Bradford or the whole of Calderdale, there'll be some areas where there'll be certain areas that will be really strong, and there'll be other areas where it's complete opposite. And I think just coming back to things like the point about childcare, we had the task force on dementia care and on senior living, and what's the opportunity for people who are sort of at home all day as senior living sort of residents for community to start being involved in things like this, and being involved in supporting childcare within their communities and so how understanding who's doing what around these organisations, I think becomes really, really important. So that was really 2 points. Just one about the Experian data, which I think is pretty up to date, and because it's financial, that they're mapping all of these businesses' financial performance in real time. I think it's quite recent. But then also the importance to then geospatially map it, and then also I think the third thing would be to try and benchmark how do we instantly understand what areas are really at serious risk and which ones are not, and in other words, how do we then sort of devise a prioritisation plan around sort of those on an area-based approach. But happy to talk to you about it and show you some of the stuff we've done around that.
Thank you, Amir. Tom, would you like to come back in on those specifics around sort of Experian and the geospatial mapping, and then I'll bring Brave in.
Yeah, thank you. So on the Experian point, so I was aware that they have a product similar to that, but I've not seen it, and we currently don't use it. On the geospatial mapping point, that is something that we can take away and actually do. So within the research and intelligence team, we have a spatial team who, in the simplest way, make a lot of very, very cool looking maps. So we can produce these maps to go alongside the dashboard, and equally in terms of looking at which areas are kind of out of trend at a more local level and simply district level. That's something we can look at how we'll do that as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tom. So we've got a short list of people to start with. Mayor Broden first, please.
Thank you for this data. It's really helpful. I think that part of the challenge is, like you say, the lag, because the idea that the creative sector is one of the sectors that's really struggling, and yet we are the most buoyant sector outside of London and Scotland. So it's quite a complex narrative, isn't it? And with all our cultural festivals, I know that we're investing so much in culture, and companies are flourishing because of the cultural festivals. So it's quite important, I think, to get to that granular understanding of the data today. Regarding the dashboard, I think just for my own use, and we might not want to put it up publicly, but it would be useful where, for example, a worker in London produces as much value in 3 days as West Yorkshire worker does in a 5-day working week. Where is the equivalence with other MCAs? is for like. So somebody that's a bit like us, is that the same in their MCA? Or is that a north-south thing rather than as an equivalence? And also, would you say, looking at the data, that it's transport that's holding us back because that cost to our economy is real? People are losing jobs, changing jobs, not setting up their business on the other side of the Pennines because they can't get there. They're not recruiting because people don't want to travel. So it would be really helpful to understand. And also, I think to Amir's point, just quickly about understanding our region, for example, being able to identify an area of disadvantage, an estate that's completely cut off, the community centre had closed, the bus training company, the bus driver training company, located their bus driver training in that opened up that community centre, and now there's cooking classes, there's a creche. We are able to intervene in a way that's quite powerful with our approach to the economy and areas that are really disadvantaged and furthest away. So I think it's really, really helpful. And one final point, if I may, Chair, I think, and this is maybe where Becky can help as well, that in 3 years' time, what skills do we need for mass transit, for example, and how can I help that pipeline and set up those courses and those skills, that skills training, and what businesses are going to need in 2 years, in 3 years' time, the skills, and we can make sure that we have that pipeline to grow the economy.
Thank you, Mayor. And I've got 3 people on the list, and I suggest we'll sort of group these comments for now, and then we can sort of come back to them. So, Ben, I think you'd like to come in first.
Thank you, Chair. So just a couple of comments. I think it's clearly positive if we can be cautiously optimistic about the kind of macroeconomic wins. That's a good thing. And I think we need to be thinking about how do we best support West Yorkshire businesses in that context. So what follows, I think, are 2 points. One is, Tom, I think there's an active debate about those GVA productivity figures, and I'm not sure I would buy into the idea that workers in the South East are so much more productive than up here. I think there's a lot in terms of how that data works and what's described to what sectors, where the HQ is, all those kinds of things that probably mean there's a bit more to dig at in there. And I know that you're doing work to look at that, which I think will be really welcome. And then the second is, I know Phil's teams are looking at how do they pivot the business support offer to support businesses facing the kinds of challenges that Becky's outlined early on, and we need to make sure that I think that we involve members of the board in that process, and that we come forward with some distinct propositions to really help. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. That's really helpful. So I'll go Andrew first, Mandy, and then Councillor Hinchcliffe.
Yeah, just to pick up on the point that the last 2 points are really about productivity, and just remind people that the Manufacturing Task Force called for a new productivity index, which I think sounds like you're already on with thinking about it, but that's probably what we will need ultimately in the dashboard if we can. And then the other Manufacturing Task Force request was that we support import and export and give businesses support to doing that, and I know we're on with that, which is great, but having something in the dashboard that just reminded us to see the efficiency of that would be good.
Be able to see the growth of export.
Yeah.
Yes, that's great, because we've got a strong strategy to support extra 500 new exporters across the next few years. How are we doing against that exactly, Andrew? Okay, so we have Mandy, then Councillor Hinchcliffe.
Thanks for the report, Tom. It was great. With regards to the question on dashboard, I think trying to get to some lead metrics would be great. Maybe using things to predict what we think is going to happen, and then seeing how far away we are from that trend, and putting that into context. So, I don't know if that's a good or bad increase. I know it's bad, or it could be even worse, but comparing it to other combined authorities will give us a traffic light system, whether we are ahead of everybody else, behind everybody else, or in line with everyone else, and then we can check if our interventions are working. The second thing on inflation, it's great to see that coming down, but for businesses it's not necessarily coming down. We don't have the protection of the price cap anymore. And we've probably had to fix prices at some point at a higher level than we would have liked to, so we can't take advantage of it coming back down. Coupled with higher input costs, I think that we need to look at maybe a basket of inflation measures for businesses as well as for individuals. And finally, in West Yorkshire we've got a disproportionate number of SMEs, I believe. and so the R&D tax credit changes affect us disproportionately. So reducing the ability of SMEs to claim effectively an R&D tax credit to the levels that they did before will really start to affect innovation in our region, and that's something we need to be lobbying about. You don't ban all drivers because some drivers speed, and it looks like the government have decided to change the rules about R&D tax credits for SMEs based on some SMEs and only a small number using the system in a fraudulent way. So I think we really need to start to talk about that, because that does disproportionately affect West Yorkshire.
Thank you, Melly. Really helpful points. I, in particular, like the idea of the basket of inflation for businesses, thinking about the price gap. I think that's great. I am scribbling furiously. Miles is taking notes. Tom is taking notes. I just want to reassure everyone these points are going to be captured. Can I pass to Councillor Hinchcliffe, please?
Yeah, thank you. It just set me thinking, actually, because recently one of our opposition members in Bradford has been doing some work on GVA and how it's made up. And what they've looked at is the fact that the subsidy within that calculation from government is very great for rail transport in particular. And because our rail transport is not quite as ubiquitous as it is in other areas of the country, we get less subsidy from government for this region than other areas. And I wouldn't mind you having a look at that in future, actually, because just talking about our case for investment using the data that we've got, I think government needs to realise that actually we're a very efficient economy already in West Yorkshire without an awful lot of public sector support and subsidy, and therefore I think there's a case to be made using some of this data to show that we're actually very productive given the limited amount of public sector funding that comes from national government, and we should probably make that case more clearly both to our parliamentarians and to government itself. So if I can share that with you, I think that might be something we can work on really to strengthen these figures to make a case for investment. Thank you.
That's a great sounding action, and Tom, you probably need to take an action to clone yourself a couple of times to be able to follow through on all of this work. I'd just like to bring Phil in here at the end, and then pass back to yourself, Tom, to potentially sort of sum up, not on everything because we've captured the notes, but just on some key reflections that you've had from the conversation. Phil.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I was going to say a few things, but I'm just going to respond to a few things that have been said as well. So I think it's really important that we're evidence-led in what we do, so it's really good that this thinking's happening, this type of conversation's happening. I think I've lived a bit of Tom's world and Tom's kind of roles before and seen some of the data that he looks at, and I think we need to be kind of clever and smart with all the information we've got and all the evidence we've got. So as Ben alluded to, some of the work we're doing in delivery, we have kind of some short-term kind of management intelligence. Some of that we might not want to share broadly in a granularity sense, but we can kind of talk about what it's telling us, and we are doing that. So, for example, we're taking a paper to the business committee later this month looking at EDI data, for example, and what that's telling us about our business offer and how that's evolving. And I think that's an important point. We're in an economic cycle that's constantly evolving. It's slightly more positive now, but there's still lots of challenges, and we need to kind of reflect on that. We need to look at the medium-term data, which I think is what this dashboard is, and make sure we're looking at the right things. And we need to look at the long-term forecasts and data to guide how we win in the future. So we need to, when we're making property investments, when we're looking at kind of investment zones, when we're looking at sectors we want to champion in the future, we need to look at where that is. Just to respond to a couple of points in terms of what the delivery data is kind of telling us on some of the sectors we're concerned about. One of the best kind of sources of data, I think, is the businesses that have applied for energy grants and the emergency energy grants we're supporting. And what we've seen there is as we launched the emergency energy grant, which is the early trailblazer for some of the stuff we're doing on the business sustainability work. We've had a lot of demand for it. We've got demand that pretty much matches the overall size of that grant, which is what we expected. But we're seeing quite a lot of demand from retail hospitality, so more of it is from that sector than any other sector, which is partly because this type of sport hasn't been open to them before, but that's really interesting. And we're also seeing demand, as we might expect, from kind of energy-intensive manufacturing sectors. So they're the kind of two areas where we're seeing that demand, and that's interesting, and that's an example of information we need to feed into this. So I think we need to use all the information, and also we need to use all our committees as well that you all sit on. So when we're talking about the issues around economic inactivity, a detailed granular discussion at the Employment and Skills Committee can kind of help with that, and then we kind of summarise that at this board.
Thank you, Phil. And I guess to join all of those strands up, and I know you are very alive to this, I think the role of the economic strategy, which then outlines where we're heading to with the different strands that you've just talked about, and then we've got these indicators so we can see the progress against the action. I think this is exactly where we need to head with that. Nikki, sorry.
I don't know if you're looking at this, Tom, and apologies if I've missed it, but when I was working on Transport for Central Government, we often made cases around the missed GVA or the missed revenue opportunity due to a lack or deficit of transport. And I wonder if there's some linkages that we could do here, given the dire situation we find ourselves in with TransPennine, the buses, and I know that you're championing all of those things, Tracy, really well. That can make quite a compelling picture when we're looking at investment into transport or the deficit that we have. So it was just to flag that, and forgive me, Tom, if you're already looking at that, but I just thought that might be helpful to businesses as well, of setting a scene of what could be possible if we had the investment and what we're missing without it. It was just a point, really.
Very helpful, Nikki. Thank you. Let's bring the Mayor in first, and then I will come to you, Tom, as we draw out this conversation.
Well, absolutely. And that was my question to Tom about how much is transport scarring our economy versus other regions that have got better transport system. But this is just a request, actually, because I don't know, in response to the spring budget item, does the LEP feed back in real time once you hear the budget? Because it might be useful to gather your thoughts, given that you have areas of expertise that you may be able to see potential opportunities or disasters that come out of the budget. And I just wonder if there's a way that people could feed back whilst they're watching the budget in real time. Obviously, our colleagues do that, but that interpretation of what it actually means for businesses in the long term is often lacking because we're having to just get a response out. So I don't know if I could suggest that. It would be really helpful to me to have your analysis in a real-time situation so we could consolidate all our thinking.
So, Tracy, let me sort of take that as a suggestion to pick up. I think I'm very alive to the fact that our business rep organisations will also be doing that at the same time and making sure that we work hand in glove with that. I think from corporate memory, historically, I think the LEP have responded on certain policy interventions in perhaps a less urgent way, but it's something that we could look to have a conversation about in live time next week. So let me pick that one up. Tom, I'm not asking you to respond to every comment, or remember, we have got the full notes, but I just wanted to give you the opportunity to share just a few sort of short thoughts in response to hopefully what I think has been a very helpful conversation on the work that you've led.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you everyone else for the comments. So we can take those away in terms of being able to compare West Yorkshire with other areas as well as districts, and within districts, that's something that we can pick up and that we can do. Like Phil mentioned and a few others, where there is granular data that might not be kind of appropriate for public consumption, we can quite easily have the sort of a public-facing dashboard covering, some of the data, and then a private dashboard for, say, internal use only, things like that. So the way I see this dashboard is hopefully something that evolves over time. Right now, we're looking at it more in the kind of economy still in a bit of a perilous position, but how business is going. My intention is, as the economy starts to get back to some normality, that we can be a bit more positive and look at more positive indicators of business growth, businesses scaling up, businesses exporting, and things like that. And just to kind of finish on the point of transport and the kind of quote-unquote sort of missing GVA, and to answer sort of one of the Mayor's comments earlier on. So we're working with the Transport for the North on the Northern Powerhouse Independent Economic Review, part of which will sort of look at transport, albeit it's more of a pan-northern approach rather than West Yorkshire specific approach. But on the role of transport and economic growth, without getting too technical, too nerdy, the part of the reason why the UK has a productivity problem is a lack of agglomeration effect, basically, of a lot of people being able to access good quality jobs in different areas across the country that sort of matches their skills with, jobs. And without good quality transport, it makes that challenge far more challenging. So it is a huge issue that West Yorkshire has to deal with. And as the Mayor alluded to earlier on, we're the largest country in Europe, largest area in Europe without a mass transit system, and it is something that is holding back the West Yorkshire economy. And in terms of how that feeds into households, it then feeds into things like lower wages and worse well-being, because more people are having to spend time doing things they don't like, such as commuting, versus actually doing the stuff that they do enjoy. So as well as a purely kind of economic angle lens to it, there is also a kind of social well-being lens as well. So it's important that we crack that.
Okay, thank you very much, Tom. And I think we're now just going to excuse the Mayor and Councillor Hinchcliffe and Ben, who are going to lobby on our behalf for transport. I think it's a very timely conversation. So I will. We've had some very substantive items on the agenda. We've got 3 items left. I still remain hopeful that we will conclude this meeting by 4 o'clock. The next item is item 8 on committees update. Please, can I urge everyone to sort of take the paper as read, and actually anyone who's going to sort of contribute to each of the committee discussions, just by exception, which does mean if there is nothing else, it's okay to say that it's covered in the paper. So to start with, I'd like to pass to Andrew to just pick up any thoughts on the Business, Economy and Innovation Committee.
Yeah, just 3 points really. It's referred to here that we've made progress on the innovation agenda, and I just wanted to report a truly excellent session that we had with Indra Mukherjee, who's the head of Innovate UK. Tracy was very much to the fore there, and it was a really strong session. And most encouragingly of all, Innovate UK are saying they really want to make West Yorkshire a bit of a flagship on this stuff. I think they've got a regionalisation agenda. We look like we're going to be the poster person for it, and he was keen to come back. So I think that's nice to note and worth saying something about. Do you want to come in now?
Just to say that I've had a few WhatsApp messages from people who work for other combined authorities in other parts of the country are quite say, what did you do with Innovate UK? And very jealous of what we've achieved.
Nice.
So we should reflect on that.
Yeah, no, that's really nice. Actually, at the Beat Committee itself, worth saying that we did agree that we were going to include business to consumer businesses in our business support offer. This is actually quite a big change from where we were before was driven by European EU policy, which was that this sort of government support can only be business to business. We're not constrained by that anymore. Given the kind of economy, especially the SME type of economy we have in West Yorkshire, this is a change I think that will be very welcome to people in West Yorkshire and a very good change for us in the LEP. And then the last thing, the Manufacturing Advisory Board has now been set up and is there to push forward the work that was identified in the Manufacturing Task Force. We had a great trip down to Coventry to the Catapult there, and Farah Butt, who's been one of the very lively members of that group, has agreed to chair that and take that forward as one of the subcommittees to BEAC. So just to let you know that Farah's doing that, and so that you can support her going forward. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And having attended the Innovate UK event, with the energy in the room, from the panel of businesses that I chaired and the speeches, it was phenomenal. I'm really confident we can do some great things on that agenda. So that's wonderful to see. Councillor Swift has unfortunately shared some apologies, so I will give a very brief update from the Climate, Energy and Environment Committee. It is indeed what's in the paper. The 2 things I would add is, in a similar way to us talking about economic monitoring, we've been talking a lot in Climate Committee about climate monitoring and the indicators there to help us achieve our net zero targets by 2038. So we had a full discussion on that, and I think there's some really good progress on the climate monitoring indicators that are taking place. The other thing that we did was had a full update of all of the zero emission transport programmes across West Yorkshire, and started to review those from a climate perspective, which I think is really helpful to join up the various things that are going on in different areas, especially on transport, given the contribution it makes to our carbon budget. So that's all I wanted to say on that. Moving to culture, heritage and sport, and just giving Nikki the opportunity to say anything by exception. Wonderful news. The same opportunity for Councillor Lewis on employment and skills.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't actually there, so I won't comment too much on the update on the meeting. Just one achievement of the 1 year of devolved adult education budget is we, in terms of having it devolved to ourselves, have already saved several £1 million on administration costs by simplifying some of the contracts. So just to highlight that real benefit of devolution in 1 year in one area, in terms of getting extra money into supporting adults in education and trying to close that skills and productivity gap.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. That's great to hear, and real progress on devolution. What we could do with more devolution into the area as well. Moving to place regeneration and housing, Amir.
Yeah, just a couple of things I will mention. Just on the Strategic Place Partnership, which is the Combined Authorities partnership with Homes England, I think this is a really powerful vehicle for really uplifting some of our sort of challenged places. And I think that the ability for a panel that now exists, such as place regeneration and housing, to bring together different strands to make that more impactful, I think is really powerful. And I think just going to the point that I made earlier about private sector involvement, and it follows on from your recommendations of getting people from the private sector more involved, there was an offer from Ben to kind of also bring to that all the other streams of funding that he's aware of and that he's using within his professional capacity. And so that's the kind of thing that I think could be really helpful. And then the other thing was just on the digital blueprint, and we really sort of talked about not just the fact that we want to see digital business transformation, but also digital inclusion, and that there's a really big sort of divide that's emerging. And there was a lot of evidence from some work done in Bradford that people that had received free devices and dongles and so on during the pandemic actually hadn't really used them. And so just giving them out isn't enough. There's actually a greater level of engagement that needs to go with that. And then just finally, just on business transformation, there was a McKinsey report that talked about how a lot of businesses are actually not maximising the impact from their digital transformation journeys. And actually the ones that have really gone the furthest are the ones that have actually been able to pivot into essentially whole new businesses. And that a lot of businesses are only getting marginal benefits from their digital transformation. So that's something that again should be just fed into the thinking behind that digital blueprint. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Amir, really helpful. Councillor Hinchcliffe was due to sort of talk about the Transport Committee, but is now on our behalf lobbying for improved transport, which feels the most appropriate use of time. Amir, as the private sector member, is there anything that you would also add on here? I'm conscious we have talked a lot about transport, so that's great. Any questions from anyone else or further updates on committees? No? Thank you. So I'll move us on to item number 9, the digital update. And to introduce this, I'd like to pass to Mandy.
Let me put my speaker on. Thank you. So it's really great that, Amir, you've just fed into the digital blueprint, because really that's what we're going to talk about. And it's touched on nearly everything that we've talked about this morning in some shape or form. We're talking about data. And I'm sure if most of us were asked to multiply 131 by 429, we'd reach for a digital solution rather than a piece of paper and work it out like we were taught at school. So it's really important. But for us, we need to separate technical businesses, so those that have a digital product, to digital that enables people, enables businesses, enables place through digital technology. And both of those things will be fed into what will become our new digital blueprint. Digital touches social inclusion, place-making, business support, skills, inward investment, everything. So it's really important that we get this right. It can enable every person and every business in the region. It can create new businesses, grow businesses, and attract businesses if we get it right. If it's done well, digital transformation can turn a caterpillar into a butterfly. If it's done really badly, it can just make a really, really fast caterpillar. And we need to make sure that we get the butterflies and not really fast caterpillars. And I think that's the point, Amir, that you were just making about maximising digital transformation rather than just doing it. So what we have currently is a digital framework, and we want to convert that to a digital blueprint. And there's a lot of work going on around this, but there are 3 key areas. First of all, there is some clusters research going on. So that's looking at our regional ecosystem across every district. I think when we look at the full ecosystem, we might find that the percentages that we perceive where digital is might be different to what we think. We need to evidence the clusters, and then we need to work out how best to support them. So obviously we've got a great health tech cluster going on. I'd like to shout out for Space of Yorkshire, but there's lots of stuff going on around digital that we need to include in that. There's been an initial meeting with the consultants, Perspective Economics. They've done a lot of work for West Yorkshire, who are doing this piece of work, and we're expecting them to report back on their findings soon. The second piece of the three sort of key strands of work was the LEP deep dive. So we did some deep dives earlier this year with 35 businesses, LEP board members and various committees. Mark hosted it, ably supported by Andrew, his glorious assistant, and I did a little bit too. I think it went really well. We had a really engaged set of deep dives, and so we've got some interesting information from that we can feed in. And then finally, the creation of the local digital partnership. So that will be a UK first, and it's a step on from the local digital skills partnership, which I co-chaired, to make this not just about skills. It's a wider subject than that. It'll be a public-private volunteer advisory board, and we want it to be an exemplar. So it will take the digital skills plan and work with that, and work with the digital blueprint. So I think it's really about unlocking digital. I think there's lots we need to do to get it right. But Andrew and Mark, have you got anything further to add to that?
Thank you very much, Mandy, and being part of all of those things that you've said, like the excitement and progress that I think we've made in the last few months is really great, and that's very much led, by the officer team, led by Sarah and others at West Yorkshire. We talk a lot about productivity and digital, whether that's sort of for digital products or actually digital tech. I believe it could be the single biggest thing that we can do as a region to not just catch up, but hopefully leap over. And I think we need to really link the outputs of this to our ambition in the economic strategy and see it as a real enabler. I'm really excited by the digital blueprint, as I think there are so many businesses across the region who are, because there's so many people who want to be there. And it was great to see such wonderful representation at all of the events, and actually, having DCMS comment on what a fantastic ecosystem we have. And I think that probably raised a few eyebrows when they came up and spent the day with us for the local digital skills plan. So it was great to see. So no further comments beyond that, Mandy, just to sort of point the conversation towards the recommendations in the paper.
Yeah, and just to sort of emphasise that, the work especially that the team did, but Marianne really led after a difficult sort of start to it, was brilliant. When we launched it, as you said, DCMS said that our stakeholders were extraordinary. And I think, the more things we can get in West Yorkshire that are extraordinary, the better. So this seems like a great start. Andrew, have you got anything to add?
No, not really. I just say that the energy is there, isn't it? And it's an agenda that's been steadily building over the last few years. I'm delighted that this group remains as committed to it as, and I totally echo what you've both said about this being possibly the best chance we've got to be transformational and possibly the area of most need. So very good.
So certainly there's a hearty endorsement of the progress made and the desire to keep that level of engagement and action moving forwards. I'm just going to open it up to anyone else to either add further support or to ask questions or comments before we move on to our next item. Okay, well, thank you very much, Mandy, Sarah and Marianne in particular for that, and my glorious assistant Andrew for helping yet again. Great, so we will move on to our final item on the agenda today, apart from those for information, which is the Langthwaite Enterprise Zone. And this is really to update the board on some of the enabling works that we want to undertake at Langthwaite to enable the development of that site, and also specifically to talk about and to update the board on a recent submission that we've made to UKRI relating to CoStar. So I think I'm passing to Kate to just sort of update the board on this paper and then sort of close with the recommendations and next steps.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as LEP Board members will be aware, the region has a two-phase enterprise zone programme covering 10 designated employment sites across West Yorkshire, and one of those is the Lanthwaite Business Park extension in South Kirby. The combined authority owns 23 acres at Lanthwaite. Works to date to bring forward that site have included the diversion of overhead power lines and progression of a hybrid planning permission for access and commercial development, which is close to gaining consent. Following a lot of hard work and fast footwork by colleagues in the Inclusive Economy Directorate, it's currently envisaged that the site may have potential to host a creative cluster, given its proximity to other businesses with a similar kind of outlook on the wider business park. And in that regard, as Chair has just mentioned, a partnership bid has been submitted to UK Research and Innovation, which, if successful, would fund a national centre for the convergent screen technologies and performance in real time, or abbreviated to CoStar, as well as production technologies. So a fantastic opportunity to take forward not only this site, but also this sector. The outcome of the bidding round is expected to be finalised in August, although we're expecting heads up towards the end of spring. But finalised in August following a period of due diligence by government, and further implications on the bid and what that means to the combined authority and partners will form the part of a future report to the combined authority. But irrespective of that bid outcome, further enabling works are required at the Lanthwaite site to bring it forward for development, including construction of the aforementioned access road and some remediation works to create the development platforms. So officers are now looking to progress these works at pace, subject to all land, statutory consents and internal approvals being in place, including progression through the assurance framework. And we're calling this a phase 1, if you like, with CoStar, if successful, as phase 2, and the further wider development of the Lanthwaite site as phase 3. Current estimate for the works is approximately 7 million. The combined authority has approved an indicative funding package from Residual Growing Places Fund, or GPF, capital, as well as GPF loan receipts, and other enterprise zone income from commercial agreements, including overage, to support this development moving forward. Further details can be found in the financial implications of the report. So the recommendations to the LEP Board today are to note the contents of the report, particularly these proposed enabling works as part of phase 1, the indicative funding package, which historically the Growing Places Fund and Enterprise Zones has formed part of the remit specifically of the LEP, and also details of the CoStar bid as phase 2. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Kate. And I guess I'd sort of say, for anyone who has had the opportunity to visit the site, which I've done a couple of times, I think the opportunity and the potential that site has to be a real economic asset for the region is huge. But the requirement for development, regardless of the bid, is also very obvious to see. So, you know, I'm really publicly supportive of this. I've written publicly sort of to support this bid, and I'm sure other members of the LEP Board are equally supportive. But we will note all of this. I'm offering the opportunity to add any other comments or support for this, but I'm seeing the nods of support that we all have to do this. Phil.
It's not directly relevant to the paper that has been submitted, but I think where we are in the bidding process for the CoStar, which is going to be game-changing if we get it, both for the potential of this site, but also for the region, having the National Innovation Centre for these. I'm hearing we're in a strong position, but we've still got to get over the line with it. And I think we'll talk about this in some of the committees that are relevant to this, which is most of them. But I think as we go through the bidding process, strong private sector support. We've already had letters of support from a variety of businesses in the creative sector and across the region for this. But I think we might be coming to you for more of that as a group as we go through the process, which isn't relevant to this paper, but I thought I'd take the opportunity to raise that point.
Thank you, Phil. And based on the nods and the smiles on people's faces, please count on this group to add very vocal support, you know, for the bid and beyond to see the economic opportunity that there is. Great, so that concludes the formal business that we've got today. I note for information, we've got the draft minutes of the combined authority in the pack. Also the date of the next meeting due to be held on the 13th of June. Obviously, we will be in touch in due course, not least to talk about the budget that will sort of come out next week on the 15th of March. So thank you very much for attending today, and that concludes the meeting. If we can turn off the live streaming when we can.